Well, hello everybody. I'm John Atack, and this is Jeremy Sherman.
It's still Jeremy Sherman.
Yeah, no matter what he tries to do, every day he gets up and he's still Jeremy Sherman. And what's more, I'm still John Atack, so nothing we can do about it, I don't think,
For
other than
now, for
complain
now.
for
Yeah,
now.
we have plans though. Yeah, we have plans
Yeah,
though.
transmogrification.
Exactly.
That's what it will be. Transmutation, all of that. Well, yeah, kick something off. Let's see where we go. I think you may
Well,
have something on your mind. I don't know.
it's possible. Um, uh, it's the worst possible outcome here in the United States of America. Um, we didn't foresee it. We're all a bit flummoxed. I've had an interesting week nonetheless. I have, yeah, I've somehow gotten better at sublimating or channeling my anxiety into curiosity and
Mm.
productivity. And I've almost been high functioning manic this week. In fact, I've come around to a question that I'd put on the back burner for a while, and uh, I I guess you could say like all the people who are trying to figure out what to do about um, Trump and cultists in general. Um, uh, I double down on my own intuitions here. That is what we're seeing in the United States right now is a bunch of people saying, "See, I told you," with various "I told yous" in mind. Um, and I've got some of that going on.
Oh, good.
Mine has been very broad.
Mm.
It made me remember that in 2015, the Washington Post uh, interviewed me about
Mm.
an article I had written in 2005 on Donald Trump's psychology. Um, that I've been at this a long time. So there's a way in which I take it in stride. Of course, we haven't actually seen the results of the Trump election realized yet. And I do find that I'm speed reading the news. I'm staying away from a lot of it. The details are uh, were intriguing before the election. They're heartbreaking at this point. But also, my work doesn't require that I pay attention to the detail because I'm very broad in my approach to this. Though
Mm.
I have learned through schooling how to fuss over uh, minutia and details, I don't think that's the case in this situation.
Mm.
And so I'm back to a question I've had for a while, which is how can you counter absolutism without another absolutism? Is there any kind of stance that we could take, an ethos that people could take that would be, you could say, asshole resistant? That is, it would be designed in a way where it it doesn't permit the easy exploitation for yet another absolutist movement.
Mm.
Um, and that's a my default assumption is that there is none.
Mm.
And I actually think that's the heart of this alternative anti-dogma dogma, which is that the bedrock keeps pulling the rug out from under itself. I take that from evolutionary theory. That is the biggest cosmic wedgie we get from evolutionary theory is that there is no surefire formula. You
Mm.
find a good one and then it fails. So this kind of anti-dogma dogma that I've been on for a while, in a way, I find myself galvanized to get deeper into it, think about it more, and think with other people. So yesterday I had a live conversation with 600 people online, and a total of maybe 1,800 by this morning have watched it, or chunks of it. And there's a community of people who have gotten interested in this question, sobered up by the election. The election has made them start to think they really have to do something
Mm.
different because what they're doing isn't working. And I do argue that a lot of what they're doing is counter grandstanding. That is, I think a lot of us reveled in we were distracted by the satisfactions of tutoring them on morality, and therefore didn't really figure out the strategic approach, the cool-headed strategic approach to what I consider the fundamental question. How do you humbly humble humans who will say and do anything to avoid human humility? That is the question for me. It's got nothing to do with lifestyle brand, or ideology. It doesn't, none of that matters. That's just ornamentation.
Yeah.
It's a fundamental question I think of as the make it or break it question for humankind. So I feel like I'm getting to it late, even though I got to it in 2005. I mean, I was on it way back when, in part, as I mentioned, because my son was the muse for this work. But and he woke me up to the fact that no, not everybody is not a educatable unit that you can simply just speak truth to and they'll wake up. Um, or you just can't evoke in everybody um, your sentiments. So, so that's where I've been this week. That's my check-in.
Yeah, I mean, I have, in the words of Led Zeppelin and Richard Linklater, been dazed and confused. Um, I take heart that, I put out a little video, 28 days from democracy to dictatorship, because that's exactly how long it took Hitler to take power, or complete absolute power. And I put it out as a warning to help people think about it. But the situation in the United States on the 20th of January next year will be very different from the situation in January, on January the 30th, I think it was, in Germany in 1933. Because checks and balances do exist, because the feel of the American people is not the same as the German people at that time. I'm heartened to see that certain Democrat states have been very busy preparing for Trump, trying to get reproductive rights into their state's constitutions so they can't be violated. And I don't think that, that sudden change where, within 28 days, there's a Freudian slip. Hitler had declared that all other political parties, including the Catholic Workers' Party, who'd helped him get into power, were now illegal. And he had imprisoned his opponents, the communists particularly, and set about creating the Führer state. I don't think, while it was worth thinking about, I don't think this is the situation in the United States. I think there are checks and balances in place which will prevent any attack. Lawrence O'Donnell did a wonderful piece. You can't deport 11 million people. It's not been done. You can have a day of violence, following on his great friend Modi in India, of course, managed to cause a situation in Gujarat in 2002, where 2,000 Muslims were killed because the police were withheld for 3 days. I'm presuming that's the model that Donald Trump is thinking about. We'll take the Leos off the streets and let people do what they want. So I think there could be horrible bad times, and I am advising friends of mine, and you're among them, to not be in America for a week or two in January, in January into February, and you could maybe go down to Mexico for that period, to see what happens, because we don't know. But terrible for the world that if Ukraine is going to go under. I must say, I probably shouldn't say this publicly, but I'm going to, that I've long thought that would probably be the case. And Netanyahu will be able to rampage through the Middle East and possibly bring about World War III. Because Trump, Elon Musk, and RFK are really not going to have any sensible attitudes towards that. I mean, the idea of RFK in charge of the National Institutes of Health and the Centers for Disease Control, an anti-vaxxer who, eats bear meat. But there you go. I'm told it's delicious, so I'm probably being unpleasant about that. So, yeah, where we go from here is the same place that I've always been going, which is we learn about what you call absolutism, autocracy, authoritarianism. We learn how it comes up in people's souls, how they, can't collaborate in the process of democracy, don't feel worthy enough, become, as I said in our last conversation, authoritarian subs, acting in response and glee towards what the Dom tells them. How we change that in people, how one by one we maybe get people to think a bit differently about the problem, and about their own responsibility and about their own right to have an opinion, which I think has been a problem, rather than the I'm going to vote Republican, which was the opinion that was most expressed on my channel in the last couple of months. It's like, yeah, why are you going to do that? You know, that's great, but why are you going to do it? So, yeah, I think it opens up the whole thing of we need to educate people in such things as courageous followership, intelligent disobedience, my friend Ora Chalef has put into the world, and teach people a little better about how to communicate, about how to protest, about how to complain, and about how we can take responsibility. And what you say is extremely important, that becoming dogmatic about dogma, you end up being a dogmat, and none of us wants that. So,
That wasn't what I was saying, but go ahead.
well, that okay, that you were talking about being anti-dogmatic, becoming dogmatic. Yes, have I understood
I
that?
was actually talking about, no, I was actually owning the inconsistency in how fundamentally opposed I am to fundamentalisms.
Okay.
I'm owning that. I'm owning that because people will say, Jeremy, you're being a hypocrite. No, I don't have a dogma. My dogma is that we shouldn't have dogmas. And it is hypocritical for me to say that, but I own it because it's kind of the point I'm trying to make. For me, the alternative to dogma is irony. Irony, in a most fundamental sense, and I don't just mean humor, I actually call it dirony. That is the dire irony. That is, if you think about what an ironic situation is, you can place a good bet and have it ironically turn out bad. You can place a bad bet and ironically it can turn out good. This has been true since the origins of life. That is, if you're struggling for your own existence, the struggle is iffy guesswork. Once again, what I was saying about Darwin is uh, the biggest disappointment from him is not that we descended from apes or a lesser role for God. It's that there is no surefire formula. And it's really hard for humans to stomach that. And it's going to get harder and harder because the world is getting more complicated. And therefore, people are going to be gravitating more and more to simplistic solutions, like they've solved reality. So the challenge, as I see it for me, is how to motivate a sense of irony in ourselves, that life is actually tragicomic. You can slip on a banana peel and die. You can slip on a banana peel and it's funny. Both are true about it, but that's the way it is with iffy guesswork. And so I've ended up gravitating there more and more, and that becomes, you could say, my dogma, but it's an anti-dogma dogma. I'm not advocating for any particular stance. I'm advocating for limberness, um, and the recognition that you will make mistakes and they have to be corrected efficiently, and thoughtfully. Sometimes you make a mistake that whatever they misquote from Einstein about the definition of insanity, total bullshit. No, often you do the same thing over and over, and eventually it works. And often you do the same thing over and over, and it doesn't work. That's the guesswork part of life. Should you, so yeah, that's all I meant by the anti-dogma dogma. I was talking about dogma, counter dogmas. And these show up across history. The Sunni in response to the Shia, the Protestants in response to the Catholics, the communists in response to the capitalists, the libertarians in response to the communists. To me, those are just dogma on dogma fights, and I marvel at how many lives have been lost in battles between both two sides that were both completely wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had both managed to detach from reality. So, yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah, fair enough. I would make the point that it's the fervor with which we believe. It's a point that William James makes in the Varieties of Religious Experience, where he says that when people convert, they will be as fervent in their conversion as they were in their belief. So if they're an atheist who becomes a theist, they'll be as fervent as they were. And that level of fervor is very important, that to become so engaged with the dogma, with a belief system of any
Yeah,
kind, that we have to then crush everything into it, and we do need to be careful about our fervor, and remember that we are considering all of humanity rather than just our slice of it.
That's right. Yeah, no, and I call what William James is referring to there, I once was lost, but now I'm blind syndrome.
yeah,
And I've noticed that people will often drop a dogma, but they won't likely drop their dogmatism. If you've gotten addicted to that sense of confidence, and I did want to come back to "we are not worthy" just to understand what you meant by mentioning use those words a minute ago. But
yeah.
yeah, when you get addicted to confidence, it's hard to give up that degree of confidence. I know several people who have shifted from one dogma to another effortlessly, and rejected the old one. I once was lost.
Yeah, I've had 40 years of watching cult hopping. People who, last week it was this that always works. Now it's this other thing that always works. I had a friend, and two of my friends, and she said, "Oh, I've got this new thing, and you just have to eat food that's the right color, and everything will be fine." And my highly intelligent friend said to us, "So you've been buying food dye, I imagine." And yeah, just shifting from this is the way, the truth, and the life onto the next way, rather than having a certain uncertainty about
That's what I'm
life.
talking about. Yeah, that's right. And William James's ally is this guy named Charles Sanders Peirce.
Mm.
He coined the term fallibilism, which I've mentioned before, and the mantra I've adopted for fallibilism is no matter how confident I am in a bet, I remain still more confident that it is a bet.
Mm.
That all I get is bets.
Yeah, yeah. We are dealing with probabilities, possibilities.
Right.
Um,
I
Certainty is.
remember what a revelation it was for me to realize um, just the heart of irony that I could bet on the 90% odds and the 10% could still come about, and it wouldn't mean I had chosen wrong.
Mm,
Yeah, it really it was surprising to me to realize that, and it's been important, I would say, to me to realize that
mm.
because I make these mistakes, and sometimes I bet on the wrong odds, and sometimes I bet on the right odds, and things came out wrong, ironically.
Yeah, absolutely. Um,
Well,
mm.
let me get, sorry, I interrupted you in the middle of something, but I also want to get back to that thing about we are not worthy. It's an interesting
I
point.
don't remember saying that, so I'm a little
Oh,
bit lost. But
you said it about Trumpists, um, that they feel that they are not worthy.
oh, there's yeah, that people who are authoritarian subs do not feel worthy enough to have an opinion, so they follow the opinion of the leader. That's the statement. Yes.
Got it. So I'm
Yeah.
very interested in the moves, uh, the the verbal part of the verb
Mm,
part of the transition,
mm,
and I would say that's true of some. I would say it's more actually probably contextual. That is, they are uncomfortable with doubt, as we all are. I
mm,
mean, I've written whole books on doubt. I wrote a book called Doubt, a User's Manual. And I could take a tax write-off whenever I doubt because it's my work. At the same time, I don't like it. It makes me uncomfortable in my skin.
mm,
And if I get too much doubt, I get self-doubt. So you could say that that's the stick part of it. That's the part that would make one want to gravitate toward a leader, a totalitarian,
mm,
authoritarian, absolutist leader. I'm also paying attention to the allure of it.
mm.
What an appealing thing it is to feel like you've solved reality.
Sure.
This video I just produced this morning is about what I call the dumbass death spiral, which is that being dumb and being an ass are mutually reinforcing. They help each other out. Um, they support each other.
Mm,
So if you're dumb, if you're flummoxed, if you don't know what to do, you'll tend to snap at people. You'll tend to throw tantrums.
mm,
I do when I don't understand something. I get frustrated
mm,
and demand to talk to the manager and can't see why the world has to be as complicated as it is.
mm,
So that's dumbness generating assholery. And then on the other end, if you are an ass, you really can't afford to think. Because to get away with being an ass, you have to speak with conviction. You can't afford curiosity. It would only get in the way. It's not only that it's inconvenient, it's actually counterproductive to being a jerk. If you're going to be a jerk, you want the confidence that comes from not doubting yourself. It is not, your tantrums will not be convincing if you admit to yourself or anyone that you don't know what you're talking about. So it's this kind of interesting carrot and stick relationship, and I see it as getting worse and worse. I just read Yuval Harari's new book and came away with that sense of it, that the world is getting way more complicated, and people are going to be that much more tempted to gravitate toward the sense of authority. So it's not that I'm not worthy. Um, it's that I'm more worthy. I mean, I talk to these Trumpists all the time, and
Yeah, but
these
it
are
was, I'm not worthy to have an opinion. It wasn't, I'm not worthy.
got it. That's right. No, that's good. So I assumed you meant the same thing. That they feel hyper worthy by association. That is, they humble themselves before the Lord so they can lord it over everybody. And it's amazing because you're talking to people who don't have much history background. They don't really understand what's going on. They never really had much interest in politics, and now they are playing top line pundits because it's easy. It's performative. A little ornamentation, um, a few kindergarten recess taunts, and suddenly you feel like a pundit and a street fighter. It's totally amateur. And yet you couldn't convince them of that for love or money. So anyway, yeah, so we're on the same page about unworthy.
Yeah, and it's
It's
also it's not simply the, somebody complained, I think on the first conversation I had, that we considered all Trump voters to be idiots, and I responded that, you can respond for yourself, but that's not my opinion. I'd also want to go on record as saying there are people who look to the Democrat Party in the same way. There are people who also consider their opinion is not developed enough. There are people who are wiser than them, and that they follow there. Because let me make this point, because too many people in the comments have presumed that I'm a follower of the Democrats. I am not. I have,
I
I have
understand.
not.
We've been through that. We've been through
I'm.
that. I
We
understand.
have. I am apolitical, and I call it as I see it. And in this case, Trump is a terrible focus. But the problem within our society is that we need to evolve and develop, mature, grow up, be willing to take responsibility for what we do, or more responsibility, or some responsibility in some cases. And rather than, putting up some flag and waving at it and following it. And that has been the tendency of human society. As you say, the Protestants and the Catholics murdered each other for the Prince of Peace. And there is something a little bit confusing in that. And it's something that is continuing. So, there's a
Yeah.
greater
So
problem. It's
yeah,
not just Trump. It's not just Trump.
not just Trump. So yeah, I get this question often. Tonight I'm having a 2-hour conversation with a very thoughtful Trump supporter, um, who I still think is an idiot on this subject.
Sure.
Um, so I have this interesting on this subject. It struck me last night that even those who learn the lessons of history are forced to repeat them because they're in our blood. That is, it's human nature, and I do believe there is human nature. It's obvious to me that there are things we do and things we don't do, and things we're more inclined to do and things we're less inclined to do. So I'm not confused by it, and I'm trying to figure out what it would mean to grow up. I'm trying to get very clear on what it means to grow up.
Hmm.
I know that from personal experience that I prefer to externalize negative consequences. That is, I'm a human being who is tempted and will fall into corner cutting for my advantage. I'm assuming that's true of all of us. Um, uh, One way or another, we're tempted that way. Um, and to your point about Democrats and Republicans, um, half the time I'm arguing with more liberal people because it's the same issue. That is, um, I expect a fair number of us to double down on our dogma, the liberal
Mm.
dogma. Um, I think it's an interesting time that way. I think some people might be sobered out of it. I mean, Kamala Harris had all sorts of disadvantages coming into the election late, but her performance of the liberal ethos was pretty miraculous,
Oh, yeah.
including all of the stars who came out to support her. So there's a way in which um, there seems to be a growing interest in what we're doing doesn't work.
Mm.
And I look back on my more straight up liberal time as being as having provoked this. That is, I'm paying a lot of attention to how I helped bring about this astonishing backlash, how my naivete and swagger
Mm.
contributed to it. And as I've mentioned before, I'm a conservative libertarian. I think we all are. That is, I'm trying to figure out what to tighten and what to loosen. I'm a progressive traditionalist. I'm trying to figure out what to keep the same, what to change.
Yeah.
If you set aside the branding and the brandstanding, I think that's what we're all doing. We have plenty of debate about what to loosen, what to tighten, what to keep, what to change. But it's not like anybody's for change, exclusively, or for loosening exclusively. So yeah, so in that sense, I am political. My definition of politics is the allocation of finite power in a world of infinite appetite. Um, uh, and yeah, I'm political in that sense. But I'm not branded to a party.
Mm.
And one of the things that I make clear in all my videos, it's just this. I mean, I show it. I don't declare it. I show that this
Mm.
is totally nonpartisan. Anyone can become an absolutist for any lifestyle brand in any kind of cosplay. It's not about what you claim to believe is so important that it trumps all other uh, considerations. It's how you strut it. You strut it as if you solved reality.
And history, the history of the US, which doesn't seem to be known by very many people who live there, would give us, for example, a political party called the Liberal Republicans. I don't know how many Americans remember that there was a political party called the Liberal
Well, but
Republicans.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and
but
so, well, liberal
liberalism
as
used to
opposed,
mean capitalism, laissez-faire.
yep.
It's been all over the place. And the names morph,
The
right?
names do morph, but the Liberal Republicans were, in fact, something we would consider. Um, we've seen a reversal in this country. The Liberals used to be the Whigs, the party of the aristocracy and the
Yeah.
king. They are now absolutely the party of the centre, and left of our supposed socialist party, which is actually a vaguely right-wing party now. And around we go. The word radical, that we've come to radicalization, where radical used to be a really good thing, to want to change things, and now it's you're a terrorist. So the confusion of terms has occasioned a certain difficulty. Coming back to the idea of growing up, I would say that my concern is helping people to consider evidence, to be able to consider evidence rather than falling into their feelings and what they would like to believe. And um, I think that's an important thing where you're coming to the point where you want to understand things and your emotions are not overwhelming you. Robert Thoulas in Straight and Crooked Thinking, the primary text of what we now call critical thinking, says that if you start getting upset about something, then you are no longer being rational. It's not an original thought, but he put the thought forward in 1930. I don't agree with that. I think you can get upset about things because rationally, the death camps are a horrible thing and you should get upset about it. But when we are overtaken by our emotionalism, by our fervor, then we lose sight of rationality, we lose sight of evidence. And we are not actually teaching our kids to be rational. We're teaching
Okay.
them to
And I
be
and so
obedient,
so
to conform,
so he, well, and we need some so here's my take on that.
Mm,
Okay,
surely.
we need some conformity.
Of course we do. Of course we do. Absolutely.
Okay,
Of
so
course we
how?
do.
Right,
We're
so we
speaking
need
a
some of that.
language. If we didn't have conformity, we couldn't talk. Yeah.
That's right, right. So once again, that's back to what you keep tight and what you loosen.
Mm.
Um, Coming back to an earlier point, I do feel like the counterculture theme of "Let your freak flag fly" has been taken over by the Trumpists.
Yeah.
Okay, that version of it. My version is different. I think that I spent a lot of time on this question of what rational means, and to me, rationality comes from the root ratio, which means you're weighing the pros and cons of
Yeah.
alternatives.
Yeah.
Okay, and there is a belief that's been with us since Socrates that if you run things through formal methods, logic or math, if everybody ran everything through, if everybody ran evidence through that, they would come to similar conclusions. That was an assumption that it's an appetite in us that runs deep to
And it
assume
leads
that.
to
Now, my
the idea of Boolean logic, yes, which is great for computers, but doesn't you can't actually logic
no,
human
so
behavior
I
that
want to be clear
absolutely.
on why I
Yeah.
think it doesn't. Why?
Mm.
I mean, the problem is the variables and the weighting. That is how you weight evidence. So, uh, so I don't see it as solving it to examine evidence. And I go one step further, which is a point that Peirce made also, this William James ally. He said that even if you're trying to figure out just what's right, you're still operating within a value system, a
Mm.
better or a worse explanation. So
Yeah.
normativity, yuck and yum, are there no matter what. So you
Mm.
are onto something important to me around the relationship to emotions.
Mm.
Um, I was mystified for a while, or at least I ridiculed that we call philosophy that it's called philosophy, which means love of wisdom.
It does.
It should be called sophology, the study of wisdom. What
Mm.
is wisdom? Uh, and
But the
and
word
every
sophistry had already been taken.
well, no, this is sophology. It's trying to
I
understand
know,
what.
I know, I know.
Okay, and so and every wanker can declare themselves someone who loves wisdom, and most do. Okay, and then I came to this clarification about it. I have to love wisdom more than I love affirmation. I Philosophers find their true perfection knowing the follies of humankind by introspection. That is, I have to, or as Bertrand Russell said, philosophy is a peculiarly stubborn attempt to think clearly. What's it stubborn against? It's against my own need to feel right, to feel comfort in my own skin. So I think that's how I would characterize growing up. And I think it's really hard for most folk and that's really easier for me circumstantially. That is, I don't need to make money off of my ideas. I don't have to sell in order to survive. And I do think that I use the luxury of not having to make money and live modestly. That is, I don't have that much money.
Mm.
But living on rice and beans and that kind of thing, somehow I got really curious about this stuff. I can afford to be.
Yeah.
Why am I so bold in my presentation on YouTube? Because I'm safe. It's not because I'm
Yeah.
tough. I'm just safe.
Mm.
So, um, and I think about, I mean, I have all these coaching clients now, and I listen to their lives, and they sound harder than mine. Hats off to them. What they have to put up with, and the amount of time that they have to spend at work and at home playing a role, and how easy it is to lose all access to any kind of exploratory mind because you're in performance mode all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you live lives like that, and more and more and more of us do, just struggling to keep up,
Mm.
and so this is something I came up with in 2004. Democracies die when leaders so powerful they don't have to face reality lead people so terrified they can't afford to.
Mm.
And I think that's our circumstance worldwide. And so I know, yeah, so I'm really trying to get clear on what our options are and how to penetrate um, the uh, the hermetically sealed hermeneutic of these people uh, at its weakest point. I have to find the point of their greatest vulnerability to curiosity, and how to sear something through there that might eke out a thimbleful of curiosity. Doesn't have to be about what I think. They don't have to be curious about that. I just want to see if they can be curious about anything at all
Yeah.
related to these big issues. They can, yeah. So, and a lot of it. So for me, the other theme that since I saw you last, and I'm almost done, though don't believe me when I say it.
No, I
Um,
won't. Don't worry.
okay, is um is how to let our freak flag fly safely. So I rewatched that series, The Century of the Self. I think it's a very important thing to review
Yeah.
at this point. And what he's talking about is our dark inner urges, how to exercise and manage them. Um, uh, and he lays out three different governing systems that have all attempted to exercise and regulate them
Mm.
in one way or another, though actually two are kind of distortions of that. Authoritarian approach is that you simply drown it out and it disappears.
Mm.
That is, if you join fascism or Sovietism, you won't be exercising that because you'll have a higher,
Mm.
you'll realize that you want to save the world and you're heroic and all that sort of stuff. Well, that
Yeah.
didn't work. In fact, it became the vehicle for those dark forces, right?
Mm.
Okay, and then there's the consumerist approach, which is that you keep people mollified by pandering to their need for flattery with all of these flattering goods that we now buy in large quantity from Amazon, at least here in the United States. And the third approach was to let your freak flag fly. Don't worry, it's completely safe. So the counterculture movement said, do your thing, and we are all one. It said both things. They were heading for a head-on collision, the two of them. But you don't have to think that when you go the hippie liberal or the libertarian approach. You simply assume that it's like the laissez-faire belief. That is, if everybody just followed their human urges, the world would go around twice as fast. Okay, I'm offering a fourth one that I think is really interesting to me. It's at least interesting to me, and I see a lot of people practicing it um, unconsciously. That is, you off jerk. That is, you go get your dark forces out in safe ways, and the only issue is whether you remember afterwards to come back. You have to exercise your dark forces. For example, killing thousands of people in a video game, and then afterwards, or jerking off, masturbating, and then afterwards you zip up and get back to reality. It's not a question of how far out you go, but whether you remembered or come back. So you can engage in all sorts of self-flattery. And so I'm very interested in how to make that an acceptable norm. In some places, with some vehicles, it's lauded. I think of church, whatever else it might do, it is a form of self-flattery. And it's revered. Masturbation, I consider to be no less a form of self-flattery. No more base. So I'm trying to demote the highfalutin ones, like religion, to an elevated status I hold for all of those ways that we can get off on feeling like like we're heroes. So England is an interesting contrast to here. I've admired it for a long time. Monarchy is a disaster, but it actually gives people a way to off jerk without turning government into their
Mm.
vanity project. They get to do their celebrity thing, the Donald Trump thing, without it being about government. And I just think that it may be the best we can do is to have some lightning rod for that kind of flattery or deference or, humbling yourself before a lord so you can lord it over other people. I said I was almost done and I wasn't.
No,
Did you did
that's
you
all right.
did you notice that?
Wow, incredible. How unusual. Yeah, since George V in 1910, monarchists had no power in this country.
Yeah.
Um, they function as vice presidents doing American corporations where they don't do, or yeah, they have no function other than to greet people and make them feel important. And monarchy
I
is,
don't I know vice presidents. There are hundreds of them now in
mm,
corporations.
yeah,
Um, but um, but it's the monarchy's different, I think, from that. And
Look,
so I admire John Oliver for recognizing that the monarchy's a form of wanking. I don't agree wholeheartedly. I agree half-heartedly. The other part is you wouldn't want a system like the United States. We're apparently, or at least it's dangerous having celebrities as presidents, at least is what I'm saying. Better to have them as monarchs and presidents.
yeah, and I mean it worked the other way around with us. That the monarch becomes a celebrity by being the monarch, and at least 50% of them are idiots.
Which is fine. The
Yeah,
problem here
as long
is
as
that
you
we have
keep
an
power
idiot.
away from them.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. As long as you keep the power away.
With
And so
Henry
what
VIII,
we've
we
got
didn't
here
manage
is,
that, you know.
yeah, and so no, I mean one of the depressing cosmic wedgies of this last week is that the United States just lost every major war it ever won. It lost the war against monarchy, against racism, against Soviet dictatorship,
Yeah.
against fascism. We just lost them all.
Even
And part
against
of that is that
China.
we did,
Yeah.
and part of that was that we let our guards down, and part of it was that we just felt so damn safe here for a while, post-war safe, and and thought that the world could run on niceness and reasonableness. It's a messier place than that, and it gets messier still with AI.
Yeah, and we'll continue so to do. This notion of off jerking. Um, so in a religion, people will go together, have a sense of community,
Yeah,
feel a relief when they come away from the ritual that they perform, which I understand,
yeah.
and that's
I do
fine.
it other ways. I watch TV, but they do it that way.
And I think TV has, in video games, cinema before that, radio, the the novel, these things, the epic poem, these things have been. If you think about the Greek notion of catharsis, listening to goat songs, uh, if you're familiar with that
Yeah, yeah,
particular,
yeah.
yeah, the tragic, the tragos, the song of the goat, that which is really distressing and upsetting. I mean, have you heard a goat singing? But this idea that there can be a catharsis, which is in the last 20 or 30 years in therapy has come up against a disagreement, which is the idea of punching the pillow, of letting your aggression out, it would appear, actually makes people more aggressive rather than less. And I think there is that possibility with catharsis. So somebody, for example, plays violent video games to get rid of the violence in their system and make them more social. And then they end up working, piloting drones and killing people. And we have recruiters in our schools when you're about 14 years old. The Royal Air Force comes out and says, yeah, it's just like playing video games. You can, So I, and there might be that some of this off jerking that it makes us less capable to deal with real life. So we're hearing about kids who have expectations sexually at the age of 16 because they've been watching porn that are actually quite unhealthy. That there are things that they've seen gangbangs, they've seen various kinds of sexual activity, and they then expect these things. And you have people feeling
Yeah.
profoundly inadequate because there's the escalation, which we've talked about in email, where there has to be something more. There always has to be something more, rather than relationship. And, as we've talked about this before, but for me, after 35 years on the path to enlightenment from the age of 17 onwards, very serious about it, I decided that I was not going to achieve it. It was simple. I decided I'd never met anybody who had achieved it, and
Yeah,
I'd
it's a
been
nice
around.
goal as long as you remember that nobody achieves it.
Yeah, and that if there is no such thing as reincarnation, then the idea of killing myself to enter nirvana doesn't seem socially very useful. And I shifted completely to the idea of connection with others, relationship with other
Okay,
people.
yeah, I want to catch something. So
Yeah.
I worry in stereo. Um, that is, I worry about opposite things, and I'm fascinated by the exactly what you describe. Two parts of it. I'll dip into one of them first. First of all, I think that one of the things the um, election might have been, we're still guessing, the dust is still settling,
Mm.
is uh, a it was uh, what is the word? Gynophobic,
Yes.
And I do see that as an outcome, as a possible outcome of porn.
Mm.
And I can speak from personal experience because I'm interested in promoting off jerking.
Yeah.
That is, okay. So one thing that happens when you watch porn is that anything you look at, anything surprising stops being surprising after a while. So anything
Of
exciting
course.
stops being exciting after a while. Um, and so you do look for more, and you are tempted to do it in the outside world. And the contrast between what we can do now in the high production value escapist tools we've got, like porn, is just incredibly vivid now. And I don't know if you probably haven't seen any AI porn, but it's coming, and good Lord, is it something?
Mm.
Wow. Um, so as a result, the contrast between what you can get through our escapist media
Mm.
and reality is getting starker and starker. So you feel like a hero, like an adult when you're a kid playing video games, and then you hit a real world which is more cutthroat than ever, and there are more options, and they're all dubious at best,
Mm.
what you should do with yourself. And you will, so I think Make America Great is really make it great like I felt when I was a teenager playing video games and watching porn. And women, to a bunch of these young guys, are like malfunctioning props in their epic escapism. But I said, I worry in stereo. So I've been working this thing that you just talked about for the last, it's also 30 years. And I frame it in terms of two tongue twister questions. Uh, is virtual virtue a virtue or a vice?
Mm.
Is virtual vice a virtue or a vice? Okay, so virtual virtue is self-flattery that you're a lofty, decent person. We want that to be a compliment for being a virtuous person. We don't want people going to church, feeling holy, and then being nasty all week, what Luther called frequent communion. Um, uh, the opposite, though, is what we want from virtual vice. We want it to be a substitute, not a complement for real vice. We don't, so I don't want someone coming out of a movie feeling, out of Hotel Rwanda and saying, fuck off, I don't need to give money I just gave in the movie theater. We don't want that. And we also don't want people taking violence into the street when it's a video game. That's exactly what I'm talking about as what we need to learn. If we're going to exercise and regulate our need for escapism, because it is inescapable for humans, we need that escapism, I would argue, in two forms of self-flattery. We need to learn how to do it where you take your flights of fancy, but always with a return ticket to reality secure in your heart pocket. That's my only point about it. That's all I can think of so far to prevent the kinds of runaway effects we're seeing. And when you mention tragedy, just one last thing. The thing about the substitutes and complements have been fascinating to me for a long time. Complements are ands, substitutes are ors. So when I look at projection and Schadenfreude, I'm looking at a glee that it's not me. So when I see a tragedy and feel some warmth in me, it's like sitting inside all cozy when it's raining outside. This can't happen here. That is, I'm safe from that. Um, and so, and that would be Schadenfreude. That's also a key motivator for projection. It's not me, it's you. So dealing with that somehow, dealing with that, the there but go for the grace of God go I side of it, and it can't happen here. Because it's happening to someone else, it won't happen to me. That's very interesting to me.
Yeah, and we wander off into conversations about mirror neurons and whether they really exist, and the extent to, the whether empathy is a helpful thing or a harmful thing. And as somebody who is trying to overcome empathy, I don't think it's a necessarily positive thing.
Well, I worry in stereo. Uh, a, a point I find interesting and useful is that torturers are highly empathic
Yeah.
in that they have to understand what would cause suffering to someone else.
Cognitive and affective empathy, as they're divided by students of autism, particularly, that
Yeah,
they're two different things. That the empathy that you have, where you understand the pain you are causing, and the pain you feel when you are causing pain, are not the same thing. The word
they're not
empathy
the same
covers them
thing.
both.
That's right. Yeah, and yes, and so I make this distinction. Um, Empathy is putting yourself in someone else. This is just my definitions, and I'm the kind of guy who is fine with any definition as long as we're consistent about it. Empathy is putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Compassion is remembering when they were your shoes. And I want to be pan empathic and pan compassionate. That's, I want to be able to do that about anyone.
Mm.
And to do that about anyone, I have to have a clutch pedal between them and sympathy and charity on the other hand. Sympathy would be what you just called the affective empathy. It's feeling their pain. If I feel if I
Feeling with them, yeah, which of course is the root meaning of the word compassion, and round we go,
Yeah, no, that's
feeling
right. No,
together.
the
Yeah.
words are sloppy.
Mm.
Compassion, they blur all
Mm.
over each other. I've looked up the official definitions, and there's a lot of smear going on there.
Mm.
But sympathy does motivate charity, and no, as at the extreme, I'd want to be able to make Hitler's case to him in a way that makes him say, "Damn, you really understand me." I'd want to remember when I had Hitlerian impulses, um, and I'd want to be able to slit his throat in cold blood.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Fairly understandably in each instance. When I heard that Ron Hubbard had died, and I was still deeply engaged in that kind of thing back in 1986, haven't really been that engaged with it since. But when I heard he died, I wept, and it was a silly thought because I realised why I was weeping. It was because I, perhaps arrogantly, had wanted, and it had not. This is not conscious. I'd never thought it through, but I wanted to be able to sit with him in his prison cell and see if he was redeemable. uh, you know, which he probably wasn't, frankly. Um, I'm gonna. This is a terrible thing to do. It's so impolite, but I'm gonna pick you up on the word stereo. What do you understand the word stereo to mean?
Oh, what I mean by I worry in stereo, I just made that
You
up.
mean two poles?
Two poles. I worry
Yeah.
about excess and deficiency on all dimensions.
No, it's
That's
just
what I
to
do.
clarify, and it's a stupid
Yeah, no,
pedantic
no.
thing.
So
The
for
word stereo
my
means solid. It doesn't
yeah,
mean.
yeah. So my equanimity comes from being equally anxious that I'm too
Mm,
much or too little of something for the
mm.
situation at hand.
Yeah, I
That's
mean,
what
I live in a daily kaleidoscope of feeling, and you know how in say as a painter, if I've made a picture, then one day I'll look at it and I'll kind of go, oh, that's all right. I got somewhere with that. And the next day I'll look at it and go, oh, what a waste of time. I no longer feel desolate and I no longer feel smug. Those are not ways in which I look at my work. I feel reasonably content or discontent.
I can feel that. I
Yeah.
recognize that. For me, it's editorial self-efficacy. That is confidence,
Mm.
a calm confidence. So confidence that I can fix things that are bad. I don't flip out. I wrote one book 12 times from scratch. I don't have to do that anymore. But I do like the joke. What did the blind man say when they gave him a piece of matzah? Who wrote this shit?
That is good. I like that. Well, let's close with maybe a couple of things actually I've written on my pad, not just one. One of them is that perhaps with sex, so having been a critic of tantra for decades, that possibly people need to be a bit more educated about sex and about their off jerking, and they need to learn how to do it in a way that's more satisfying, so that they're not such a pain in the arse the rest of the time. I don't think Tantra is the way to that, but Tantra is the only formalized sexual training that's really gone in any direction. The other is a wonderful Tennessee Williams quotation, which was the secret to happiness. Do you know this one? What the secret to happiness is?
No, I don't think
In,
so.
insensitivity.
I think there's something to that. And so
Yeah,
let me tie those two together.
yeah.
So I am
Tantric
very concerned
insensitivity.
about, I worry in stereo. I'm very concerned about what you described. I laid out how that might have led to gynophobia
Mm.
in this current election. Um, Here's another possibility. Um, I wouldn't count on it, I wouldn't bank on it, but it's still interesting to me. What if it would be nice if we didn't partner over tits and ass? They're not highly correlated to compatibility. Uh, that is, if we could subdue our lookism, we're intensely lookist as a
Mm.
species. Um, uh, for understandable evolutionary reasons and all of that, and also
Yeah.
not just evolutionary reasons. By now, it's a status symbol to have arm candy or a trophy wife or a trophy husband or something like that.
Mm.
Okay, is it possible? The answer is unlikely, but possible that people could off jerk about looks and then partner with someone compatible. I don't bank on it. But it could reduce the amount of burning and churning and divorce and mishap if we could ever get to the place where we stopped marrying for status.
Mm.
If we stopped marrying for based on that quite arbitrary, distracting feature,
Mm.
looks. Um, I think there are probably a lot of older married couples that have gotten there. If the guy, for example, still has intense libido, he drains the lizard and he gets back to his partnership.
Mm.
It's startling and offensive to his wife because of the lookist thing and the ways in which women, for all sorts of reasons, would be compelled to find security in being seen as attractive.
Mm.
Um, so yes, there's a lot of problems out that way. I don't see this as an easy solution, easy problem. I'm tracking younger generations to see how they handle it,
Yeah.
because we're kind of a transitional generation this way. At least I
Oh,
am.
and how
Yeah,
and what a rapid transition it was in our generation.
yeah, and
And
I'm straddling both worlds. You know, I
are
spent
you allowed to
years.
do that? Is that
I think you have no. I have you think you have
two
no
world
choice.
straddling?
That's right. Well, that's the other thing. That is why I think we need to off jerk is that I live in two worlds. I live in
Mm.
the real world and the world of my imagination.
Mm.
And that's exactly what we're talking about is that when reality gets too bad, then uh, we can escape into our imaginations
Mm.
when we're too disappointed. That is, so when I talk about the dumbass death spiral, how we get dumber and become more jerks, I see that as a collective problem. I've called it the dissociation death spiral,
Mm.
which is that reality gets harder, we escape more, neglecting reality more, which makes it motivates us to escape all the more. So I actually see that as the most likely cause of extinction for humankind,
Mm.
is that we'll simply become legends in our own mind, neglect reality. We've already eaten up the fat of this earth. It won't tolerate much more delusions of grandeur. We're down to we're in this crisis where, on the one hand, reality won't put up with much more of our delusions of grandeur. And as a result, we're that much more tempted to escape into them.
Mm.
And that's the context for Trump.
Yeah, and we have, with AI, with everything that's happened in the last couple of decades, we have moved into the Imaginarium. I'm not a great fan of Schopenhauer. I find him too difficult. Um, but I love his text on happiness, where he explains that he's shown us how miserable life is in his philosophy, and this is how to deal with it. And boiling it down, it says there is such a thing as the life of the mind, that you can live in your imagination, and you can live in your mind, your way of dealing with the world, answering questions. If you're mathematically inclined, you can add numbers up and subtract them, whatever. But there is that world which is separate. Somebody sought to correct me in my comments the other day, saying that I was talking about Platonic forms or something. I don't think I am when I say that Kant said, yeah, there's the real world and there's your interpretation of the world, which is where you're living. And that strikes me as a very useful piece of information to say, yeah, I'm living in my interpretation of the world. When we look back to the 19th century, we find that the 19th century in Western culture came upon a new idea, which was that people could be married and have a relationship intellectually. That taking a wife was not a matter of having somebody to look after you, bear children for you. You got people like John Stuart Mill who came along and said, no, you can actually have a relationship with this person. We have come to expect that. And it's a good thing to expect. I'm very happily married. And it's a marvelous, wonderful thing to be in a relationship with somebody where, in fact, I am not separated from my wife. I am not in the imaginarium sexually or in any other way. We are able to collaborate as people. And, sometimes it gets, distressing. Sometimes we get upset with each other, which is part of that normal process. But it works out. I wish that for other people, because I think that too is a part of the solution of learning how to relate better, learning how to be better within relationship, which we're not teaching at all. It's there are just a lot of presumptions, and we've now got a lot of porn and this sort of stuff, and our relationships are the catastrophic relationships of the soaps that we watch or the movies that we watch, rather than learning to enjoy each other, learning to take from each other. I think that's missing in most of modern life, and a terrible thing that it is.
Um, yeah, so I worry in stereo. And so when Schopenhauer talks about the life of the mind and how you can go there,
Yeah.
I see that as beneficial. I thrive on a life somewhat like what you described. That is, I live in the life of my mind. My non-spiritual path is trying to understand reality better. That is,
Yeah.
there is no higher power for me than reality, not even
Mm.
myself. That's that
No.
thing about philosophy that is loving wisdom more. But that's not where I want to go with it, which I want to go with how dangerous it is as well for an individual to live in their own mind. I'm paying a lot of attention to the early 1700s when popular fiction came out and porn suddenly became the source of all. Masturbation became the source of all evil and all disease. My assumption is that we suddenly realize that everybody's got a mind and they can run their imagination in all sorts of directions, that not necessarily in the Catholic direction or the religious direction. So I'm at least as wary of that, and also of relationships that are mutually enforcing through the resonance of a delusion. Um, that is, couples can also become legends in their own mind, and so
Fully I do. Yeah.
yeah. So while I live in what you describe, in a way, and I should also say as an aside that I think that actually drama has gotten better and better um, in many ways, and that it is a way of musing about our natures.
Mm.
I do find wisdom, not just egotainment, in watching movies. I watch huge quantities of TV. I think of it as like mainlining human nature concentrate. You're watching how we behave, and you're doing it in this way that is often, not always, but often, um, a little more realistic than we could tolerate if someone pointed their finger at us. That's again back to that thing about Schadenfreude. But that's always been the power of fiction, is that you can say things that you couldn't say bluntly to someone. So I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing that uh, uh, yeah, I worry in stereo. That's all it comes down to. And while I appreciate the life of the mind as the kind of curiosity that you and I both have,
Mm.
I don't assume it can be that for everyone. I think there are a lot of education deprived people, and I'm paying attention to them. And I don't want to just say, if I were in charge of the world, everybody would move in this direction. It's a real challenge. There's a lot, I try to put myself in these people's shoes, whether it's to undermine their shoes, or whether it's to, yeah, better understand what's going on in the world. I'm trying to imagine what it would be like for someone who wasn't me. My mantra is also, if I were them, I'd be doing exactly what they're doing.
Yes, of course. And from childhood, my concern has been how did this other person arrive at this point? Not what is the sensible thing to do, but why do they believe this? So I don't think I'm particularly judgmental. I'm interested in knowing how somebody came to a conclusion. In terms of the life of the mind is in our interpretation of the world. The world is still out there. If there's a disjuncture between the world and the interpretation of the world, then things will go badly wrong. So the life of the mind must be associated with that. Sometimes, and in times of peril, the life of the mind is an escape from the horrors of reality. But sometimes it's a way of making reality better. And I think that probably everybody does have imagination. There is a rare psychiatric condition where it's not meant to exist. It differs greatly from one person to another. Some people think in pictures, some people think in words, some people think in sounds, whatever. And I agree with you that some of what's being offered to us as drama, I mean, things going back to 25 years to 6 Feet Under, or to The Wire, or more recently to Succession, or to Billions, or The Good Wife, The Good Fight. These are drama, I think, on a level of Shakespeare, because you can come away from them. And 6 Feet Under made me think about death and our culture's view about death, and it was very elegantly made. It was dramatically powerful, and so it becomes edutainment. It becomes an education that we take from there.
Yes,
Much more so than the crap that the documentaries, many of the documentaries are being made that are really not very interesting. They're just regurgitating the same simplistic facts, and it can sometimes take you to deep places. But I think everybody has or can have some sense of the life of the mind. It doesn't mean the life of an intellectual life to me. It means the life of the imagination, thinking about what it is you'd like to have, thinking about going somewhere. And I also agree with you that existentially, if you're having to slave to eat every day, to find somewhere to shelter, then there's little, unless you're Ramanujan or somebody of that incredible intellect who managed to change mathematics while, begging around temples. It's unusual to have those two things together if you have existential necessity. But yeah. Anyway, I've got to go. You've got to stay, and
I'll stay and hold forth.
Hold the fourth for us. And
Hold the fourth.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. And
likewise.
And it probably will be again. We'll probably meet again.
Yes, I hope so.
In a few weeks' time or something, and we'll see where we've arrived at by then, if we've arrived anywhere. Great. Thanks very much,
pleasure.
Jeremy.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.